Representative Norris, would you like to move your bill?
I would, Chair Howard. I move House File 743 for referral to the Tax Committee.
And I understand that you have an author's amendment. Could you please explain your author's amendment?
Yes, Chair Howard. So the A1 amendment deals with the TIF provisions in Section 10. It basically incorporates some recommendations made by the Office of the State Auditor to avoid some unintended consequences of the program design.
All those in favor of the A1, say aye. Aye. Opposed? A1 is adopted. Representative Norris, please present your bill as amended.
All right. Thank you, Chair Howard and members. I'll apologize in advance. I didn't realize a PowerPoint was required for this assignment, but I'll proceed nonetheless. So, Chair Howard and members, we know we're in a housing affordability crisis. One way to address that is by increasing supply. Another is policy solutions to address regulatory or market conditions that are increasing prices. This bill aims to incentivize the conditions that create affordability throughout our state. It does it in four different ways. First, it addresses the full spectrum of housing from preservation up through market rate. For instance, it extends eligibility of housing infrastructure bonds to the construction, acquisition, and rehabilitation of permanent housing affordable to incomes at or below 50% AMI and provides a preference for even deeper affordability. It authorizes $400 million in housing infrastructure bonds, $50 million to help preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and $100 million for public housing rehabilitation. It also establishes a real estate excise tax to discourage large corporations from purchasing large numbers of single-family homes and provides additional revenue to address housing needs. Second, this bill supports local innovation that cities are deploying to address needs and promote development. For example, it adds workforce housing projects to eligible projects that an HRA or EDA can undertake so that local units of government can more easily develop workforce housing. It also increases the statutory levy limit for HRAs to provide more resources for them to address local affordable housing needs. It allows statewide eligibility for local units of government to transfer unobligated increment from a TIF district to a local housing trust fund. Third, this bill provides incentives to cities that allow for local efforts that meet diverse and local needs. For example, it includes matching grants to cities in greater Minnesota that will cover up to 50% of the capital costs of the public infrastructure necessary for workforce housing. It directs Minnesota Housing to establish and administer a grant program to reimburse cities up to 50% of the cost for fee waivers or reductions to qualified new multifamily and single-family developments or for locally established inclusionary housing programs. And it has $10 million for matching grants to local units of government that commit non-state resources to a local housing trust fund. Fourth, and lastly, it allows for community-specific solutions that are sensitive to the different housing needs across cities and regions. For example, it authorizes any city by ordinance to establish a relocation assistance program for displaced tenants in the event of the demolition, substantial rehabilitation, or change of use of affordable housing. And it's got $5 million for a pilot program to provide grants to municipalities to cover up to 50% of the cost of infrastructure that would otherwise be required to be paid by the developer for new housing developments. I want to stress, members, that this bill is the start of a conversation. Some of the appropriations you'll notice in this bill are blank. The excise tax language needs some fine-tuning to achieve its intended goal, and I'm open to ongoing conversations with the stakeholders. But what this bill does do is bring many different tools to the table for our consideration when putting together our omnibus bill to achieve our goal of affordable housing for all Minnesotans.
Thank you, Representative Norris. First up, we have Daniel Lightfoot, and after that, Cherry Shoquist Henderson. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Daniel Lightfoot with the League of Minnesota Cities. First off, I want to thank Representative Norris for his authorship of the bill and for his leadership on housing issues. I think unlike the last piece of legislation that was considered by the committee, we do believe that this piece of legislation does guarantee affordability in so many ways that are very important to our local units of government. It does provide incentivization of some of the changes at the local level rather than broad brushstrokes and one-size-fits-all mandates. I do think that, to Representative Norris's point, some of these provisions you have seen in this committee before. For example, the Local Housing Trust Fund state matching grants, capital investment resources for housing. But we view this comprehensive approach as a really important method to ensure that we are not only looking at the entire housing spectrum that our cities have to ensure for their residents, but also take into account the regional differences and the city-to-city differences of unique housing needs. When you've been to one city in this state, you've been to one city. And all of them have different housing needs, and we view this bill in the policy and resources provided as a great way and a great path to help local units of government address their locally identified housing needs. And with that, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of city testifiers here as well to speak on both the Metro perspective of this bill and as well as Greater Minnesota.
Thank you. First, we have Cherry Shoquist Henderson. On deck, Scott McMahon.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. For the record, my name is Sherry Shoquist, and I serve as the City of Golden Valley. And thank you, Representative Norris, for authoring this act. I'm here to provide a metro area perspective and focus on the importance of the bill's provision for a inner suburb like Golden Valley to address our local housing needs across the housing spectrum. I have the benefit of working for a city that is 100% committed to affordable housing and committed to meeting a variety of housing needs for our residents and residents of the metro region. We do have challenges in developable land and funding to fill affordability gaps at all levels. We find that our main goals include the preservation of existing affordable housing and advancing development projects that provide mixed income housing in our city to assist us in meeting our affordability goals and providing full spectrum housing needs. We are in support of Section 15 for the naturally occurring affordable housing preservation. We are in support of Section 17 to establish a local housing trust fund that, in addition to flexibility for tax increment financing, to be able to use those funds to add to affordable housing trust fund would help us meet some of those deeper affordability levels and help incentivize developers that are already wanting to work with cities like Golden Valley and are committed to developing at that 60% AMI level, but really struggling to get the 50 and 30% AMI. And obviously, the other provisions of the bill, especially the excise tax and the housing cost reduction incentive program, are other tools that would be very useful to cities in the metro area. So thank you for the opportunity to share our metro area perspective today.
Thank you. Next, we have Scott McMahon, and up next after that, Melissa Taphorn. Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Scott McMahon. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Minnesota Partnership to share our perspective on housing in Greater Minnesota. I want to thank Representative Norris for bringing this very important bill forward. As was previously described in the last bill and in Mr. Lightfoot's comments kicking off this bill, we need scalpel approaches to housing. Every community is different. The solution in one community is not the solution in the next community. And this bill provides a whole lot of scalpels for the Metro, for Greater Minnesota, to address our housing issues. We need more housing in Greater Minnesota. We are short in every community. We have communities that haven't had a new housing unit built in years. The reason that is because we have market failure in greater Minnesota. When you take the 5 cost drivers of housing development between labor, materials, land acquisition, financing, and public infrastructure, those costs are more than our market will support. So to give you an example, if you build a new house that costs $325,000 to build, the bank's going to tell you that house appraises for $250,000. How do you build a new house when you have that type of market situation? You heard earlier this year from Mayor Fabian, former Representative Fabian from Roseau, about an apartment complex that they built up there. 37 units, cost $6.5 million to construct. It appraised for $4 million when it was done. The city of Roseau threw every tool they had at that project, from tax abatement to TIF to fee waivers to you name it, just to try and get that housing developed. That is the case that we face in communities like Austin, Marshall, Glencoe, Virginia, wander through greater Minnesota. That's the reality that we face. The provisions in this bill give us a lot more tools to address these problems. Investing in supporting communities to help subsidize the public infrastructure, to build new housing, helps decrease those costs. Giving them the flexibility to figure out different financing tools, different structures, to have those around there. These are the types of solutions that we need in greater Minnesota to get our housing built. We're happy that this bill is being heard. We strongly encourage you to find ways to roll these provisions into your omnibus bill. These are the things that will start swinging hammers in greater Minnesota and getting more housing built in our communities. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Melissa Taphorn, and last, Paul Egger. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Howard and committee members. My name is Melissa Taphorn. I am the Executive Director of the Washington County Community Development Agency, as well as the Legislative Chair for Minnesota NARO, which is the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. Our organization is a membership organization of over 150 housing authorities, housing and redevelopment authorities, and public housing authorities or agencies across the state. We are on the front lines of this housing crisis, trying to promote strong and viable communities throughout Minnesota. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of House File 743. I will limit my remarks to just those that directly affect our members. That is increasing the HRA levy rate, expanding the HRA powers to include workforce housing, and appropriating funds to the publicly owned housing program. One of the most powerful tools the legislature has equipped HRAs with is the special benefit tax levy. It's flexible, and I hate to say this, but locally controlled, given the context of the conversation today. And 3, it bolsters our local housing markets. Our communities face unique housing issues, and our solutions are equally unique. Some HRAs use our levy funds to create multifamily rentals, others use it to provide down payment assistance, and others provide funds to housing improvement programs, and there's everything in between and full spectrum, right? HRA levies are the primary source for those local housing trust funds as well. The proposed increase to the levy maximum in Section 9 of this bill provides the flexibility for local elected officials to fund a variety of programs that meet their pressing housing challenges, and they determine when it is needed. The increased rate is well-timed when the overall housing needs are significant and there is much at stake for communities. The legislature has also empowered HRAs with a broad spectrum of programs to address our housing markets, expanding that list to include affordable or workforce housing to address the middle income range is essential to so many of our communities and HRAs. Our businesses can't survive without employees. We can't attract new businesses without available workers. And many greater Minnesota and pockets of the metro cannot absorb increases to the workforce because we don't have the housing to house them. So we eagerly welcome this opportunity. I've spoken to you before about the need for additional resources to rehabilitate our public housing units, and thank you for acknowledging and valuing the need to invest in the upkeep and renovation of our public housing units. Appropriating cash, the publicly owned housing program will provide flexibility to leverage future investment in these properties. Public housing is home to some of our lowest income seniors and families. They deserve a safe, secure, and dignified place to live. Thank you, Representative Norris and the other bill authors for the inclusion of these tools for HRAs, and we look forward to being part of the solution to the full spectrum of housing issues across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, we have Paul Egger. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, again, Paul Egger, Senior Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Minnesota Realtors Association. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts and some concerns that I had an opportunity to share with Representative Norris. Look forward to continuing the dialogue with him as the bill moves forward. I think the discussion today has been a really helpful one, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking the time to hear both of these bills. The Elkins bill has a lot of good ideas in it that are worth continued dialogue amongst all the stakeholders and committee members of the legislature. And I think the bill that Representative Norris has in front of you, also ideas like infrastructure grants and fee reduction waivers are good ideas that I think getting all these out on the table are helpful moving forward. I also do, though, want to take a few minutes to address concerns with a couple of provisions in the bill. The real estate excise tax in Section 2. We believe enacting a new real estate excise tax on certain buyers would certainly obviously make buying property more expensive for some, but it is not going to do anything to address the supply issue that we've been talking about today. With the rising interest rates over the past year, including, I think, today, rates are jumping even a little bit higher. The market is certainly cooled, but there still are not enough homes. And we've talked about that data earlier in the hearing and earlier this session, so I won't take your time on that today, but clearly we have a problem with having enough housing to meet current and future demand. If there were more homes available, existing and new, to better balance supply and demand, there would be less interest in the market from investors. So the best way to minimize role investors in the market is to increase the supply of housing. And also just want to point out on this excise tax that increasing taxes on the purchases of properties will increase the cost of housing for subsequent buyers or renters, because that cost will be passed on by the corporate entity. And I just want to briefly address the relocation assistance in Section 11, which would allow cities to require that a property owner provide relocation assistance to all tenants of affordable housing units as defined in the bill. Requiring that property owners provide relocation assistance would be costly and may result in unintended consequences such as rent increases to cover the potential liability of having to provide relocation assistance and depressing new investment in affordable housing units. Instead of an unfunded mandate on property owners, the legislature could fund tenant relocation assistance directly. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time today.
Thank you. We do have the A2 amendment. Who's offering the A2? Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, the A2 amendment takes the dot, and actually puts in a dollar amount. $2. The reason we brought it up is we've had a number of bills go through this committee, and this is a finance committee with no appropriations, just the dots. We need to start looking at what those dollars are. I'm sure by now you've had your targets. We've had the budget forecast. It's time to start doing the work. We have the first deadline on Friday. So with that, this is more to talk about the fact that we have a lot of bills that we don't know what the numbers are. It's time to start doing that and putting the numbers in place so we have an idea what's going on. We've had over $6 billion go through this committee so far, and that's not counting the dots. So with that, I will withdraw the amendment, but it was a talking point to make sure that we start looking at the numbers.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. When you did your math, though, it could have been $6 billion and $2 if we would have. But thank you, and we're getting there. Member discussion. Anybody? Do you have some? Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, Representative Norris, I understand where you're coming from on this bill, and there's some good ideas in it. But one of the problems I see is, or one of the good things I see is that 50%. I wish we had a number on there how much money was going to that program, because we need that throughout the state. Workforce housing in greater Minnesota is a huge issue. Everywhere we look, there's jobs available, and a lot of the jobs are highly skilled jobs that when a company does find somebody to actually fill that highly skilled position, there's no housing for them. And you can't buy a house overnight. It takes time to buy a house or a home. The other problem I have with this bill is the fact that when you get down to the public housing, it's just shifting the dollars. It's not fixing the cost. For building a home, it's not fixing the dollars, or fixing the price, it's shifting the cost. Privately owned housing units, they have to do the upkeep and maintenance out of the funds that they are able to get from rent. Public housing doesn't. We have hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. And all that is doing, taking the taxpayer dollars that was overpaid to the state of Minnesota to the point of $19 billion, and taking that money and giving it to somebody else to fix the housing that we're supplying vouchers for through, most likely through Section 8 housing, to cover those costs of rent. And now we're covering the cost of building maintenance and repair. Yes, is public housing important? Absolutely. But the cost of that housing needs to be built into the price of the rent, and not be subsidized by taxpayer dollars on another end. I do thank Representative Norris for bringing this forward. There is some good things in this bill, but those are things that we need to work on and find a way to shift the costs to where they belong. We have nonprofits that are at the 30% AMI that are looking at, and it's the largest ones in this state, going out of business because of these costs. They don't get this money because they're not public housing. But they are helping the lowest percentage, those in the homelessness, those that just getting into housing units. And they might go out of business. But we're taking money and giving it to facilities that cities have taken the responsibility for, and giving them tax dollars from citizens that have no part of those cities. So with that, I will leave it there, and I hope you can get it worked out. I'm hoping this bill does come back here so we can actually fill in the dots. And yeah, one other thing is the taxing of the corporate. Most builders are corporate entities. They're going to build a development. They might do spec homes. That just increased the cost of those houses because of the tax, which is not what we want to do. Also, a huge part of senior housing is corporate entities that build large complex of single, duplex, fourplex, or larger independent living communities for seniors. I have a number of them in my district. That would take that away, because it'd now be taxed, increasing the cost, making it less viable for seniors to live in those independent living areas where and their rent takes care of everything, from maintenance of their unit to snow removal, and they've used a lot of that this year. Lawn upkeep, maintenance of the roads, maintenance of the water and sewer system. But I'm afraid with this bill, with those taxes, it's gonna then shutting that out. So that's the last thing we need, because I'm one of the last of the baby boomers. I'm gonna need that soon. And so it's, unfortunately, I like a lot of the ideas in this bill, but right now, the way it sits, I cannot support it.
Representative Norris, Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Thank you, Representative Norris, for continuously chipping at the housing crisis of Minnesota. And the conversation is really needed, and we're having them, and that's healthy, right? And so I just want to know that your efforts are well noted. So thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Kozlowski.
That came quick. Thank you, Chair Howard and Representative Norris. I also wanted to just echo and say, thank you for bringing forward this bill. As we've heard from many, there's a ton of support for it, and for good reason. Coming from greater Minnesota, across the state, everywhere, affordable housing is holding our communities back, and it's holding our communities down. And so I really like, the pieces in this bill, the 50% reimbursement to greater Minnesota, especially for the infrastructure hookups. We know in my community, we talk about housing is really a math problem, and especially when we have cities that are spread out, that makes it particularly challenging. So I really like that. Also the 10 million to our local housing trust funds. My question is on the excise tax, the 97% going to the state and the 3% to the county. Can you just walk us through, again, about why did the county, and then how will those dollars go out to benefit the increased development of affordable housing, for example? Will those flow into a housing trust fund, or how does our community then hold those dollars accountable back to developing and making sure that those dollars are then back for housing?
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard and Representative Kozlowski, thanks for that question. If it's all right, I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Lightfoot to talk a little bit more about the design of that particular element.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Kozlowski. It's a good question. The key that we had with that provision was to ensure that, and as Representative Norris noted, that provision's in this bill as the start of a conversation of what the state role might be in addressing and mitigating the challenges that many local units of government are having on the negative effects of corporate purchases of single-family owner-occupied homes, then transitioning them into single-family rental. I'd have to look back and see specifically in tax policy why there was a portion retained at the county level. I believe it has something to do with the administration and collection of the tax itself, so as not to have an unfunded mandate on counties. But I'd have to look to make sure. And then, the provision would allow a local unit of government, to your point, to utilize the proceeds of that excise tax in any manner that they saw fit for affordable housing. It could certainly be own source public revenue into a local housing trust fund, to your point.
Anything further, Kozlowski?
Right. I really appreciate that answer and that clarification. Obviously, we'll have a part to play in it in the state and the county, our local governments and private partners. So this is a really good bill, and I'm going to be really proud to support it today. Thank you.
Representative Norris, I want to thank you for your work. I want to thank Mr. Lightfoot and the league as well for putting together a suite of packages, of bills, some that we've heard in the past, some that I can guarantee will be part of a package that this House is going to move forward. And I did want to highlight just to the notion of, I think it was Mr. McMahon from the Greater Minnesota Housing Partnership who mentioned the market failure to build housing that's affordable. And we could literally do all of the bill we did previously, but if we're not making public investment, we're not going to build the affordable, especially the deeply affordable housing. So we need to have both the conversation on policy and funding, and I really appreciate you bringing this bill forward. And with that, I will renew the motion that actually, Representative Norris, we're short on time, but I will give you a minute to give us a closing comment.
Thanks, Chair Howard. I'll be brief. I just want to thank the members for the discussion. As I said, I'm really bringing this bill forward as the start of a conversation of some different tools we can consider. I appreciate the comments by Lee Johnson. I think the point you raised, and I mentioned, the excise tax, I think we've got some work to do. I think the part about, senior communities is particularly well taken. We're going to take this bill to tax next and kind of maybe sharpen up that piece around the excise tax, and then I'm sure, as you said, some of these provisions will probably be coming back to us in the form of our omnibus bill.
With that, I renew my motion that House File 743 is amended be re-referred to the House Taxes Committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The motion prevails, and the bill is on its way to taxes.